going to talk to you about a rather unusual revival today. It's been amazing, hasn't it, to see the way that the public in Britain have taken the staff of the NHS to heart and honoured them for their self-sacrificial work during the COVID outbreak. And I want to tell you today about a revival that came out of another epidemic that happened 170 years ago, and of the stories of those who similarly risked their lives to help others find Christ. On the bleak moorland just outside Tredegar is the old cholera graveyard of Cefn, which means, ironically, Ridge of Light. About 250 people are buried there, many of them in unmarked graves, and most of them are victims of the cholera outbreak that took place in 1849. The headstone of the grave of 20-year-old Thomas James reads poignantly, "One night and day I bore great pain. To try for cure was all in vain. But God knew what to me was best, did ease my pain, and gave me rest." And another drunkenly leaning stone records the fate of 3 members of a Griffiths family, father, mother, and a young son, who all died on the very same day. The cholera hit Tredegar pretty badly, and by the end of the outbreak, there were at least 157 people who had died from a population of less than 8,000. Here's one account of the way that the place was affected. No sooner than the last tribute of respect had been paid to a departed friend than the news reached the ear of another being dead, who was quite healthy a few hours previously. As an instance of its severity, a whole family residing in Charles Street was swept away in a day. The mother died about 11 in the morning, 2 children about 4 in the afternoon. The father assisted an aged lady who acted as midwife in the locality to place the remains of his loved ones in coffins as they were brought by the undertaker. Before 10 at night, the poor man was a corpse. And ere the following day dawned, the aged lady fell a victim to cholera and was no more. Cholera is a bacterial infection picked up as a result of drinking contaminated water. It causes serious vomiting and diarrhea, which leads to very rapid dehydration. Death can occur in hours. Someone who is fit and healthy in the morning could be dead by nightfall. In 1849, it was fear of this terrible disease that caused people to seek God for his protection and salvation. In Wales, tens of thousands were added to the churches in just a very few months. It was one of the biggest revivals ever to hit the country, though it was one of the shortest, lasting just 6 months. The summer of 1849 was a long, hot one in which drought conditions prevailed. Many normal supplies of fresh water dried up, and people were forced to use unsafe sources. The first outbreak was in Cardiff, the town where I live. Then it was a place of just 16,000 people. Within a month, 138 had died. A newspaper editorial gave the following advice to the population. The strictest cleanliness should be maintained in person and in habitation. And having done all that can be done to effect this object, we should calmly proceed with our usual occupations. Sounds like Johnson, doesn't it? Placing firm reliance on the merciful providence of an all-wise deity. The circumstances in which we are placed should induce caution, but not nervous agitation or faithless misgivings. In the year 1832, when the cholera committed sad havoc in Swansea, a little boy told his mother that he had discovered an effectual remedy for the complaint in the 91st Psalm, a portion of scripture which we commend to the perusal of our readers. It's hard to imagine the Daily Mail publishing something like that in its editorial today, isn't it? By mid-November, the disease had disappeared with the coming of winter rains. By then, 396 people had died in Cardiff, just under 5% of the population. The industrial communities at the heads of the valley suffered most in Wales. Merthyr Tydfil, then the largest town with a population of 45,000, was particularly badly hit. A young Baptist minister wrote, "I'm here in Merthyr today and the scene is remarkable. The cholera is making terrible havoc on large numbers of the inhabitants, and its decimations are fearfully sudden." As many as 539 people died in Merthyr just in July, but worse came in August, when on average 36 people died every day. One local historian wrote, "Hardly a house escaped without feeling the lash of this scourge. Some were carried on carts to the burial ground from the midst of the heartrending cries and sighs of the widows and orphans." Another wrote that scores of people were fleeing the district to avoid the pestilence. Merthyr was totally ravaged and experienced a higher death rate than any other district in England and Wales, bar one, that being Hull. Church and chapel leaders of the time played a huge part in providing practical help, support and reassurance, as well as spiritual guidance to the fearful people. In some cases, ministers lost their lives trying to help the people. In the heads of the valleys in South Wales, at least 6 ministers, 2 ministers' wives and several of their children lost their lives to the disease as they served their communities. I want to tell you about one or two of them. Thomas Price was the minister of a Baptist chapel in Aberdare from 1846 until he died in 1888, a period of 42 years. During this time, he baptized 1,596 people and planted out 12 new churches in most of the pit villages around Aberdare. But the cholera struck his family in 1849. His wife, Anne, died on the 1st of September, just 10 weeks after giving birth to a son. The baby was sent to Tira Founder, a farm in nearby Cumbach, to be looked after. Now, here's a personal connection for me. At that time, this was the home of my own great-great-great-grandparents, William and Barbara Edwards, who must have been friends of the Prices and who were themselves Baptists. Sadly, the baby son died from cholera at the age of just 15 weeks. Then there was Evan Morgan, a minister in Penydarren near Merthyr. His preaching was said to have been simple, direct, and very effective. Tragically, the cholera brought his ministry to an end, for Evan, together with his wife Catherine and their 6-year-old son Henry, all died of the cholera on the very same day. 4 other children, aged between 3 and 13, were orphaned. After writing about this revival and publishing an account on Welldigger, I received an email from a lady who lives in America. She very kindly sent me a copy of a translation from Welsh of an account of what happened to the Morgan family as a result of the cholera, because she was descended from one of the surviving children. It was written by her great-great-grandfather, Joshua Morgan, one of those 4 who survived. And this is probably the most vivid account of this particular revival that I have come across. It may be the most vivid one that survives anywhere. He wrote, "We were a happy family, consisting of father, mother, and 5 children. We children never dreamed of any trouble at this time. My father was preparing his sermon for Sunday, and we were prepared for a feast that was to take place on the Monday. We expected a special guest to pay us a visit, but instead came another visitor, and its name became a terror to the country, the deadly cholera. Henry, my brother, made an effort for life, but he was only a child of 6 and had no power to fight the cholera. His pain ceased that played upon his brow with the fingers of death, and he slept forever. The feelings of my parents were intense, and the same feeling ran through the one that was left, i.e. Joshua himself. Immediately after the death of my brother, Mother was in the claws of the enemy, and everybody could see that her effort was futile. In the midst of her pain, she cried out, "Oh God, what will become of my dear children?" Yes, it was the children that bothered her more than the torture of the cholera, and she also died while praying for her small children. It attacked with all its strength and fierceness, more than usual, on my father, to deprive his church of their pastor and the small children of their father. Short but hard was the effort of the conqueror of the world. There in the bed, a sober sight, father, mother, and child as dead bodies, and 4 children without a home, and no one to take care of them, as far as I knew. It's a sobering account, isn't it? But the outcome was very positive. Joshua Morgan, brought up elsewhere, became a Baptist minister who served in Wales and America. For a time, he was the minister of the Welsh Baptist Chapel in Trehavard, Rhondda, where I was born. He died in Cleveland, Ohio in 1914 at the age of 73, while his widow, Mary, a Rhondda girl, survived until 1934, dying when she was 91. Now that is within living memory, just about. And then just one other. William Robert Davies, a Baptist minister in Dowlas. He was a very gifted and energetic leader and was greatly respected across the nation. He was described as being full of zeal and enthusiasm. He saw 84 new members added at Caersalem, his chapel, in his first 2 years there, 61 of whom were new converts, whom he baptized in a pond nearby. Now that sounds like revival to me. Caersalem's historian described what happened in the cholera epidemic. Contemporary accounts of the local scene convey a harrowing picture of suffering and distress as the disease carried off its victims so quickly. All this caused a sudden rise in the number of people seeking to become church members. Mr. Davies found himself busy baptizing people, and this, together with the visitation of the sick, he carried out without regard to the risk of infection to himself. On the 4th of August, the disease struck the Davies' own household, and his daughter died of cholera. Davies must have been absolutely grief-stricken, but he continued with the work of visiting the sick and encouraging the fearful and pointing the lost to Christ. On the last 2 Sundays of that same month of August, he baptized no less than 150 people. But days later, Davies was himself struck down by the cholera. He suddenly became ill at 9 in the morning, and by 7 that same evening, he was dead. He was 51 years old. And so Dowlas lost one of the best ministers it was ever to have. Thomas Rees, an independent minister and historian, said of the revival that no less than 9,139 were added to the membership rolls of 67 independent churches in South Wales in just 3 or 4 months during that revival. If the other denominations experienced similar growth, then the number of those saved in the revival in South Wales would have been about 30 to 35,000. This would amount to around 40,000 for Wales as a whole, given it was the south that was worst affected by the cholera. Proportionally, that makes 1849 one of the biggest revivals Wales has ever experienced, probably the 3rd biggest. And I just want to finish with a couple of thoughts about features of the revival, which are quite interesting. In many places, that terrible cholera outbreak created great fear in people's hearts. The result was to cause many of them to flee to the chapels to seek God's mercy and protection. For some, Once the cholera abated and fear evaporated, their desire to seek after God fell by the wayside. However, there were a great many more who continued afterwards faithfully to be chapel members and worshippers of God. Fear alone, it seems to me, is never just the best means of drawing people close to God. It's the grace of God added to the fear that people might be feeling because of their circumstances, which is going to draw people in a way that leads to them being fully and completely committed to Christ for the remainder of their lives. Another feature of the revival was its seriousness and its tendency to focus around prayer and seeking the face of God for protection and deliverance in the face of what was interpreted as a judgment from God. One minister wrote, "Drunkenness ceased and gave place to a deep sobriety. The swearing was silenced by the sound of grief, and the most thoughtless wretches flocked into churches, seeking shelter in the day of adversity." The result was that the jubilation and joy that characterized many earlier revivals were markedly absent. There were those who had experienced some of those earlier revivals who were taken aback at the character of this one. Now, this is interesting. Thomas Rees wrote, "A good many warm-hearted old Christians had their doubts about the reality of these movements because they were not attended by loud cries, promiscuous singing, jumping, etc., as some former revivals were. But the audible groans of hundreds and the floods of tears shed under the preaching of the word clearly manifested some strong inward feelings which the eloquence or the schemes of man could not effect. And what is still a more convincing proof that it was a work of the Spirit of God, the thousands of young converts, with comparatively few exceptions, who are walking worthy of their holy profession." Now that's amazing, because in some ways, really, in recent years, the reverse attitude of that perspective prevails. And people say this could not possibly be a revival caused by the Holy Spirit because of the manifestations that seem so outlandish. It's a complete reversal of what was being said in 1849. There are few, if any, surviving testimonies of those saved in some of the older revivals, the 1849 revival included. But what we do have is some other stories of those who paid the ultimate price for continuing to preach the gospel to those who are seeking salvation. And those we should honour in a way, in the same sort of way that we honour the NHS today for their, in some cases, totally self-sacrificing serving of people. And there's no doubt about it that when fear grips a nation, for whatever reason, it does cause people to turn to God and to seek for safety in Him. And that means that those who already know God have an amazing opportunity to show the love of God and to point people to Christ, who can be their rock and their salvation in a time of difficulty. God bless you.